All right, this is good. It looks like we have about 46 students who joined us so far. Let's see. I just saw a question from Raj about the audio settings. So since it's a webinar format, you won't be able to unmute yourself and speak during the presentation. So hopefully you can hear us okay. But throughout the presentation, you'll be able to ask questions through the question and answer or chat box. So that's for all students. We're going to give just a brief presentation about your guide to the student visa appointment process and all about scheduling the student visa and other tips that we have for you as you're going through this process. So we'll give our presentation first, and then at the end, we'll have plenty of time for question and answer. So you'll see that there's a Q&A toolbar that you can actually click on and ask questions in that. And then at the end of the session, we'll take some time to answer your questions. So that's kind of the overview. And with that, I think if our panelists are ready, we will go ahead and get started with our presentation. So welcome everybody. We're very excited to have you here today. I know many students attended our I-20 session on Monday this week, and now we have our visa appointment session to go along with that. So hopefully we're able to answer a lot of your questions earlier in the week, and then we're looking forward to answering more of your questions today during this session. So I am going to go ahead and let my lovely panelists introduce themselves.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever we are meeting you. I'm JC, and I'm the director of the Kearney Center, and I am super excited to have so many participants joining us this morning.
And I'm Elizabeth Lorenz. I'm the International Recruitment Specialist in the Kearney Center at Minnesota State Mankato. And again, thank you for joining us.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Ahmed Sadiq. I'm a graduate assistant here at Minnesota State University, and I'm so happy I could join you today.
Great. So during this session, we're going to be covering quite a bit of information. So I just want to give you an overview. So again, if you have questions related to some of these topics, hopefully we'll be covering and answering the information during the session. But of course, if you have additional questions, we'll answer those at the end. So I'll be briefly touching base again about how to request your I-20 if anybody missed that session on Monday. How to pay the SEVIS I-901 fee, which is required before scheduling your visa appointment. How to actually schedule your visa appointment and what that process looks like. How to schedule an emergency visa appointment if that is something that you end up needing to do for some reason. What to prepare for your visa interview as far as the documents that you actually need to bring with you to your visa appointment. How to practice and prepare for the types of questions that you might be getting during your visa interview and other tips that we have. And then what to expect when you're actually attending your appointment the day of your visa appointment, and how to best prepare yourself for that important interview. So with that, I am going to hand it over to JC, I believe. Oops, there we go.
Great, thank you. Okay, so if you have not received your I-20 yet, that is your first step to get this ball rolling. And we're not going to cover too much on that. If you do have questions very specific to requesting your I-20 or issues with your I-20, we'll refer you back to a recording of that session we did on Monday. But just real quickly, you should receive when you receive an offer of admission in your email, there will be a link inside that email that takes you directly to the page where you can request your I-20. You need to use the email address that you entered on your application. So go into that inbox and sift through if you still haven't been able to request your I-20. The information that will be on your I-20 is everything that it will reflect, what your goal is when you come here. So it's going to have your name, it's going to have our institution name on it. It will have the program that you identified that you wanted to study on your application. It'll list your program dates, when your program starts, all the way through the end of your program. It'll also indicate your financial information. So your International Maverick Scholarship, if you're an undergrad admit, that should be noted on there. If you're a graduate student and you have an assistantship, that should be noted on there. So if you have your I-20, take a double look at it, make sure everything looks accurate. If you've not gotten your I-20 yet, go back into your email and see if you can find that one where you can actually request it. It will come to you in your inbox. And currently, because of COVID, we are allowed to issue electronic I-20s, and that will be the document that you would print out and sign and bring with you to your visa appointment. We do have a lot of students requesting their I-20s, so in advance, we thank you for your patience as we work quickly and efficiently to try and get these to you as soon as possible. So please expect maybe a 10 to 12 business day wait. Now, once you have your I-20, you will need the information from that document in order to pay your SEVIS I-901 fee. So this fee is required in order for you to even make your visa appointment. So you will go into this website, and Beth has it conveniently located up here in the top. You'll click on that link and go into this page where it says pay I-901 fee. You'll click that, and up comes this application validation. You want to be very careful when you're entering in your information. You'll pull your SEVIS ID number, which is on the top part of your I-20, starts with an N. You want to be careful that you enter that in just exactly as you see it on your I-20, and put your surname and or your last name, and then your given name. It might be your first and middle name, and then your date of birth. Pay attention. In the US, we do things a little backwards sometimes, so it's month, day, year. You'll hit submit, and you want to make sure that once you make the payment, you want to make sure you print out a copy of that receipt. You will need that receipt for your records. It's just something that you'll keep with everything else that you have with your I-20.
And I'll just add one note to that.
Yeah.
This is the only website where you will pay your SEVIS I-901 fee. There are other websites out there that offer vendor or third-party places where they say you can pay your SEVIS I-901 fee, and that has confused some students. So we actually do share the direct link to the SEVIS I-901 fee when we send your I-20. So make sure that that's the only link that you're using to pay this fee.
Great point, Beth. All right, so now you have your I-20, you have your I-901 receipt. You're ready to set up your visa appointment. It's really important that you go into the Department of State website and identify where you can make your visa appointment. Due to COVID, we're having a lot of, shifting in wait times for getting a visa, and we're hopeful that the Department of State's website is accurate and up to date. So you want to definitely be checking the closest embassy where you could make your appointment. And if you're not able to get anything as soon as possible, you may be able to start looking around, further out from where you live to see if there's a neighboring country or city where you could potentially make that appointment. Beth, are you able to let us get into a website, like go into this actual
Yeah, definitely. Let me
travel?
pull that up just a second. If it lets me share my screen again.
While you're doing that, I think it's really great that we have Ahmed on this call with us, because he went through this exact process not too long ago. And so I'm pretty sure it's still fresh in his mind, and he can definitely give us some insight too.
Well, yeah, like JC and Elizabeth said, the important thing is that you keep updated with the travel.state.gov website to make sure that there are appointments available at the closest embassy to you. Sometimes the closest embassy may not have may not have sufficient appointment times or have long wait lists. So in that case, you might want to try another one in your country if there is one. And if not, sometimes you will want to try to expedite your appointment, which is like an emergency appointment. And this is a point we will talk about later in this presentation.
Thank you.
Perfect. So this is actually the website you will go to start off, and we'll be sharing this website as well with you in the email that gets sent to your with your I-20. So you'll be sent to the student visa page, and you can actually enter in the city or location where you would be applying for your US visa, whether it's at the embassy or the consulate. So you can type the name of that city. So just as an example, I'm going to put in Mumbai. And then it will show the estimated wait time. A lot of cities, and we are aware of this, are showing that emergency appointment only, like Ahmed was mentioning. So you can still go ahead and fill out the DS-160, which is that application form to complete the visa appointment request form. And what you'll have to do is schedule the earliest date that's available for you, which could be in the next calendar year 2022. You still have to have that DS-160 filled out and an appointment scheduled before you can request an emergency appointment. So just don't panic if you see that. Just know that that is the process that they have in place. And in most cases, the US Embassy and Consulate websites are specific to the country that you're applying in. And so each country might have a slightly different process of what you need to provide as far as documentation for that emergency appointment. And I'll give an example on the next screen when we go back to the PowerPoint of what that could look like for different countries. But just know that's where you can search the current calendar wait times. If you scroll down just a little bit on this same website, it's under study and exchange, and you can view all the entire overview of all of the student visa types. There's 3 different student visa types typically, which is the F student, M student, and J student. Most of you should be coming on an F1 student visa, unless for some reason you might be coming on an exchange program, which in that case we would be issuing, you would be applying for the J visa. But this gives you the entire overview of the application process of how to apply, the fees for the visa appointment, and also the required documentation. We'll cover this in a little bit later about specific documents you need to bring, but this is definitely going to be your go-to website for all of the specific questions that you have about scheduling your visa appointment, preparing for your appointment, straight from the Department of State website. So this website will be your best friend as you're going through this process. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen for just a second and jump back to our PowerPoint. Okay. So once you've had a chance to actually go in and fill out this, you'll start here on the US Department of State website, filling out this non-immigrant visa, the DS-160 form. When you select the country or the location where you're applying for your student visa, that's when it's going to take you to another window specific to that US Embassy or consulate site, and you'll complete the DS-160 application on that page. Like we mentioned, you first have to fill out the DS-160 completely, and you do have to pay the $160 visa fee. So this is a fee that you will have to pay each time that you schedule a visa appointment. So just keep in mind, it's not a one-time fee. If for some reason you end up having to go for a second visa interview, if your first interview is not approved, that is something that you would have to pay each time you schedule the appointment. So after you've filled out the DS-160 and you've selected the earliest available appointment, that's when you can actually log out of your profile and then log back in to request the emergency appointment. And I mentioned that some embassies and consulates do have slightly different processes and timelines of scheduling the emergency request form. So when you log back in to your DS-160, you'll see a new option that says emergency request or emergency appointment. So you can go ahead and click on that and see what specific information is available for the embassy or the consulate that you're applying from. So this is just another example from the US Embassy in India. And they do have a specific criteria here that says for students or exchange visitors who are scheduling an emergency appointment, they want your program to be starting within 60 days. So they will not accept any emergency appointments if your program start date is farther out than 60 days. And that's pretty common for a lot of sites. They want to prioritize students whose programs are starting very soon. So keep that in mind. If you, right now we're still outside of that 60-day window. So depending on the country you're applying for your visa appointment in, it's possible that request would be denied right now because you're outside of that 60-day processing window. But as we're getting closer to the start of the fall semester, that's when you could be able to go back in and try to request an emergency appointment if you're not able to get an earlier appointment yet. And I'll ask Ahmed, do you have anything to add to this as well, since you just went through this process recently?
Well, yeah, the first thing I was going to talk about is what you just mentioned, which is try to apply when it's very close to the beginning of the semester. Most embassies will just flat out deny your request if it's like 3 months or 4 months before your actual start date. Make sure that you know the exact documentation required and the exact process that is needed, which we will talk about in a moment. And when you are explaining like why you are requesting the emergency appointment, make sure to make it very clear that you are going to start your semester on XX and that you need to be in the US by this exact date so that it can be easier for them to review your case.
Perfect. Thanks, Ahmed. So this is another screenshot example from the DS-160 form. So this is what it should look like after you have submitted the DS-160 visa appointment application, you paid the fee, and now you can log back in and actually see this option, emergency request, in your profile. So you should be able to click on that and then enter in your tentative travel date, the reason for the emergency, and then a brief explanation. Below this, there's actually an option to upload emergency support documentation. So you can upload a copy of your I-20 that shows your program start date, along with any letter that you may have requested from MSU about scheduling an emergency appointment. So we do have the option, if you need to schedule an emergency appointment and you would like a supporting letter from MNSU, we have a process to request that. So you can let us know and we'll provide this to you. But again, only if you need to schedule that emergency appointment. And you can upload this as supporting documentation. Once you've submitted that emergency request, the US Embassy or consulate will be getting back to you by email. Most of the embassy sites say to wait between 2 to 4 business days to hear back from them. So you will have to wait a couple days to see if that emergency request is approved. And if it is approved, then you can go in and cancel your original visa appointment and then take the emergency appointment date that they give to you. Okay, so once you actually have your scheduled date, and hopefully, of course, it's in time to join us for the fall semester, that's when you really want to start the process of preparing your visa documents that you will need for your interview. And again, on that webpage that we shared earlier, there's the entire checklist of documents that you that they recommend you bring with you to your visa appointment. So we've just summarized that briefly here. So of course, the first 3 documents that are really important for you to bring is the I-20 that shows that you've been accepted to MNSU and has all of your program information. You of course will also need to bring the most recent copy of your passport. So your newest passport, if you've had more than one, make sure to bring that with you. Along with that SEVIS I-901 receipt that we mentioned earlier too, that activates your I-20, you do need to bring proof that you made that payment. They also want you to bring proof of your visa application fee receipt as well, which is that DS-160 payment. so 2 receipt copies. Some embassies are going to ask you to bring the DS-160 confirmation page of your appointment as well. So it's just a good idea to, once you've submitted that DS-160 form, to print a copy of that page off, keep it with all of your documents and bring it with you to your visa appointment. There is a requirement to bring a photo for your visa as well, because in the US or in the passport, when they issue the visa, they have your photo with that if you haven't seen a US visa before. In some cases, if you are unable to upload a photo of yourself on the DS-160, if it fails for whatever reason, you do need to bring that photo with you to your appointment. So just be prepared and have that with you. You'll also need to bring with you an admission letter to MNSU showing that you've been accepted to your program, along with the documents that you provided as part of your application. So the bank statement and financial affidavit, which shows how you will plan to pay for your education in the United States from whoever your financial sponsor is. Or if you have a graduate assistantship, you can also bring a copy of this assistantship award letter as well as financial support. You'll also need to bring your academic transcripts from your high school, or if you're a graduate student from your bachelor degree program, you'll want to have these documents with you, as well as English proficiency if you are applying in a country where English is not the first or official language. You do need to have a copy of your TOEFL, your IELTS, your Duolingo, SAT, all those supporting documents that you use to apply to the university. Now, keep in mind, this is a long list of documents to bring with you. And in most cases, the consular officer is not going to ask to look at all of these documents, but it's better to be over-prepared, to have everything with you and be very organized with the documents, know exactly where they are. Because when you're actually in the appointment, appointments only last about 2 to 3 minutes. So that's not a lot of time, and you don't want to be spending that time sifting through and trying to find the right documents. So we would recommend having your documents paper clipped together, maybe in a folder or a binder, easily organized so you know where everything is should they ask for it. Ahmed, do you have any examples from your interview of what documents they actually asked for?
Yes, definitely. And I know that, like Elizabeth said, this is like a comprehensive list, but as a rule of thumb, if you think this, if you don't know like if a certain document is important or not, or should you bring it or not, as a rule of thumb, bring it. Like if you think that, I don't know if they will ask me for this or that, just bring it, just to be safe. And like Elizabeth said, it's better to be over prepared than to be asked for something and you don't have it. Personally, for my interview, they literally asked for I-20 passport, Civis I-901. They asked for the DS-160. They asked for the admission letter, the bank statement, and they also asked for the grad assistantship award letter. So they asked for about 80% of the documents that were listed here. So it's always better to have them with you and in an arranged manner so that you don't have to look for them while you're in the interview. And also do not present stuff to the counselor if they did not ask for it. If they did not ask for a document, do not give it to them. They like will ask for very specific documents, and you do not want to give them documents that they did not ask for.
Great, thank you. So once you have all your documents ready, you have your visa appointment date scheduled, this is when you can start practicing for the actual interview. So there's of course many different questions that a consular officer can ask you, but this is just a summary of the types of questions that you will be asked, or the related questions that you would be asked by the consular officer. So the first thing to note is that you should be prepared to do your interview in English. Even if you are coming for an intensive English program, it is still recommended to at least try to have some answers prepared in English. This shows the consular officers that you are making an effort and you're taking your interview very seriously. So do be prepared that it should be conducted in English. So the first type of question that a consular officer is typically going to ask you is, why do you want to study in the US? And why did you choose this particular university to study at? So you do want to have a strong rationale why US is the best destination for your education and why this university is your top pick. You also want to clarify what your academic goals are in the United States. So why you're choosing this particular program to study, why this major, maybe some different aspects of the major that have attracted you to this program. So you want to highlight those details and be prepared to answer that, along with what are your professional goals after finishing your program. So the consular officers want to see that you have a clear idea of what you intend to do after completing your program in the United States. And really what they are looking for is they want to know that you have intentions not to stay in the US beyond your program. As a student on a student visa, they want to see that you have intention to return to your home country or at least depart the United States after your program to pursue your professional goals. So because you're coming in as a student visa, that's what's considered a non-immigrant visa. So your intent should not be to immigrate to the US even after your program. Now, of course, while you're here, those plans change and some students end up staying, but at the time of your visa application, when you're preparing and you're answering these questions, your intention should be to depart the United States. And the consular officers are going to be looking for that clear intent. So make sure that you have that answer ready as well. And then of course, the big question, they want to know, how will you be paying for your education in the United States? So you do have to have a clear plan to cover the cost of your program, not just for that first year, but really talk about how you'll be covering the cost of that program for the entire program. You're coming for a bachelor degree, that's typically 4 years. If your master's degree, that's typically 2 years. So they do want to know that your financial sponsor or the source of your funding will be available all 4 years or all 2 years or whatever the length of your program might be. So you will show those financial documents that you used for admission, which is typically just for the first academic year of study in the US, but make sure you're ready to answer that question in case they ask you what your plan is for all 4 years. So with that, I'm going to ask Ahmed as well, if you can share maybe some of the examples from the types of questions you had from your visa interview.
Sure, Beth. And these questions are really spot on. They are the main themes that the consular officer will ask you. To add to that, some of the questions that may ask you, well, how many universities did you apply for? Why did you choose this particular university aside from the rest? They will ask you about your course of study. If you are an undergraduate, they will ask you, why did you choose this major and why at that university? If you're a graduate, they may ask you, what did you study for your undergrad and why are you choosing to go for a graduate program right now? The professional goals are also important because they want to, as Elizabeth said, they want to verify that you have a non-immigrant intent. They want to know that you do not want to stay in the US after you finish your degree. And as the language says, you should present strong ties to your home country at the interview. So you need to have a very clear and concise answer as to what you're going to do after you finish and why you want to go back, not just you will go back after I finish. They want to know what exactly you will do after you go back and after you obtain your degree.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this is just kind of rounding out our final tip, number 7, as part of this process, what to expect the actual day of your visa appointment. So these are just a few suggestions that we've had from previous students, also from different sessions we've attended with consular officers or embassy officials. So of course, the first tip for the actual day of your interview is make sure to remember all of your documents. Have these ready to go the night or a few days before your actual appointment, organized in a folder so they're easily accessible to you the day of the appointment. On the day of appointment, make sure that you are dressing for success. So your appearance it really does matter during the visa interview. The consular officers do take this seriously. So the way that you dress and present yourself actually plays a big role in how that consular officer perceives you in just a couple minutes that they get to know you. So make sure that you are dressing to present yourself well. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to wear formal business attire or anything like that, but at least go in with your hair done, presentable outfit, whatever that might be, looking professional and ready to go for your appointment. The day of your visa interview, make sure that you eat a good breakfast, because when you typically are going to your appointment earlier in the morning, and oftentimes you will be waiting in the embassy for several hours in some cases, and you might not have any access to food. So make sure that you go in not on an empty stomach, but you're ready to go for and wait for a little bit before your appointment. So that's not a distraction to you throughout the day. Arrive early to your appointment as well. There will be different security checkpoints that you have to go through at the embassy where they're going to verify your identification and have you go through security. Sometimes that can get a little bit backlogged depending on how many appointments they might have that day. And especially now with different social distancing and COVID-19 measures, this process might take a little bit longer if they have to sanitize between individuals coming in for their appointment. So it's best just to arrive as early as possible. So like I said, you'll go through a security checkpoint at the US Embassy or consulate. Keep in mind that there are no phones or technology allowed with you once you get past that security checkpoint. So you do actually have to check this in with the security checkpoint area. And then when you finish your appointment and you're exiting the embassy, you'll be able to collect these personal items before you leave for the day. So just keep that in mind. And then once you get through security, you'll actually be placed into a visa waiting room or waiting area. In some cases, they might give you a number that they will call when the consular officer is ready to meet with you. In other cases, they might call your names directly. So just be prepared for either one of those options. And then once you actually get your number called, remember to relax, take deep breaths before your interview. Like we've mentioned, the visa interviews are very, very short, typically only lasting 2 to 3 minutes. So it's important to be calm, but also be concise. When you're speaking with the consular officer, make sure that you are just answering the questions that they're asking. You don't have to add extra information if they didn't ask for any specific other details. They'll ask follow-up questions if they do have more information that they need from you. And then what the actual space looks like, most of the interviews are conducted at a stand-up visa window. So in some cases, if you've gone into a bank or like a walk-in area, there's usually that glass window that you meet with the person on the other side. It's very similar at a US embassy or consulate. So you'll do your interview typically standing. Like we said, have the documents organized and give these to the consular officer only when they ask for specific documents. We've been told specifically by former consular officers, they do not like it when students just shove the documents through the window right away when they get up there. So just make sure that you have everything ready and don't give anything to them that they are not asking for. So again, that's why it's so important to have your documents organized in your folder. So when they ask for the I-20 or they ask for your transcript, you know exactly where it is and you can just give it to them. So those are a few of the tips for the actual day of the interview. And I will again ask Ahmed if he has any additional tips or insight from your recent experience.
Again, Elizabeth, this is really great because each one of those tips is really important and they actually matter in your overall, your overall experience for that day. If I had just to add one thing to this great list is just be confident. I know it gets scary. I know you go through a lot of checkpoints before you actually get to the window itself where you're going to have the interview. And that can be very intimidating. I know it was for me at least. Just try to be confident. You can practice your interview before you go there. Do not memorize your answers. Do not like write questions and then memorize the answers, and then when you're asked them, you just lab them out. Counselors can actually know when you're just like repeating an answer that you've already memorized time and time again. Just try to be calm, try to be natural and be confident. And since you already have all the documents needed and you already prepared for the interview well, trust that it will go smoothly and that you eventually will get the visa.
Great. So that actually concludes our formal PowerPoint presentation for this part. So just a couple things before we jump to question and answer. We do actually have visa prep sessions with our international enrollment assistants. So if you copy this hyperlink, you can go in and schedule a visa prep session to practice some of those questions that you might be getting during your visa interview. And all of our international enrollment assistants are international students who have gone through this visa interview process themselves. So exactly what to expect, and they can speak to their experiences as well. And then of course, if you have other contact questions or information, our contact information is here. And make sure that you are following us on all of our social media sites, because we do put a lot of helpful tips out there, a lot of short, quick videos from current students. So it's a great place for a lot of resources. But before we jump into any Q&A, JC or Ahmed, is there anything else that you would like to add?
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I did want to mention that, you know, you may be trying to make a decision on what you're going to do about fall semester with a lot of uncertainties out there. So I want you to know that there are three things that you can be thinking about. If you're lucky and you're able to get a visa appointment and obtain your visa and get here by August 16th for orientation, that's awesome. If you aren't able to get your visa, but you've got a visa appointment out in the future, you know, like later into fall semester, but you kind of want to maybe start your program, you can start part-time online from home. So that's an option for you. You'd keep your admission, take one or two classes, and you could defer your I-20 to January. If you can't get your visa and you don't want to start online, it just won't work for you, and you just want to defer both admission and your I-20 to January of 2022, that's absolutely an option as well. So we'll send everyone some information after this webinar, and we'll include those options for you and the steps you need to take if you decide to do something regarding a deferral. So I just wanted to let you know that if it doesn't work for you this coming August, we have some different strategies for you so that you can get here.
Awesome. Thanks, JC. I was just looking through some of the questions. I see a lot of the questions that came in the chat box. It looks like most of those were answered. So thank you, JC, for tackling some of those. So if you do have specific questions, if something was not covered about your particular situation, feel free to type these into that Q&A box on the toolbar. But I think what I'll do, if it's okay, maybe we can, we'll take turns reading the questions and answering, and we can alternate. And if anybody wants to jump in on specific questions, we can go ahead and tag team some of those. So the first statement, actually, it's not so much of a question, is about please look into the issue of Kenya. So I'm just going to mention that briefly. I know that there are some issues right now with students scheduling visa appointments in Kenya due to emergency appointment wait times. I also know in some cases, students have had some difficulty paying the SEVIS I-901 fee. So if that is the case for your specific situation, if that's the issue that you're referring to, send us an email and let us know what your specific issue is so that we can try to find a solution. Because a lot of students are facing similar issues, not just in Kenya, but other parts of the world as well. So just let us know what that is specifically and we can try to address that. Okay, so I'm just looking, looks like Shaike, if I'm mispronouncing your questions or your name, I apologize. And you did have two questions about the visa appointment ratio in your country, and also can we change the intake? So I'm not sure which country you are from, but I do know that you can Google the visa appointment ratio for your specific country, and there should be data from the last year. A lot of this data, of course, is going to be pre-COVID, but you can actually look up the visa appointments, visa success rates for your specific country. Those are reported by the US Department of State. So you should be able to find those in a quick Google search. And then for your follow-up question as well, how can we change the intake? JC, I will let you answer that one. It looks like you just typed an answer.
Yep, I just typed an answer in there. You can email that email address I entered and just let them know your tech ID and the semester for which you want to join. And they'll communicate with you if there's any additional documents they need to move your admission to a different semester. The anonymous attendee, the one about starting online, that's great. I feel like students are being on the ball and super prepared, trying to figure out what fall looks like for them. Within the next couple weeks, we will be sending out a form that students like you can inform us of what your plans and intentions are. So if you want to start online from home, we need to know that so we can start working with you on getting you registered and connect you with an advisor. Unfortunately, if you have a visa appointment that's in the middle of the semester after like the first week of classes, you need to remain home and do your program online from home and then physically join us in January. You can't come into the country, a month into the semester with an I-20 that starts in August. You'll have a difficult time getting into the semester. Plus, as an F1 student, you have to be in a certain number of face-to-face credits to keep your immigration status intact, and you can't start from home in online classes and then transition to campus and still be in all those online classes. So there'll probably be a bit more communication and some more conversations that we can have as you start, preparing for that choice on what you do for fall.
And just one thing to add to that as well, as you're getting closer to that August 16th start date, when you're within that 60-day window, go in and see if there's an option to schedule any emergency visas. That option could come up, and it's possible you would get an appointment earlier than September 23rd, hopefully. But like JC mentioned, there's other options if you're not able to physically join us for this fall semester. Okay, next question. Hi, Wesam. Thanks for joining us. You received your I-20 and paid for the SEVIS and booked your interview. And you're going to request an expedited appointment. Good. My question is, would you be able to tell me when exactly I can make an emergency request, because I have only one opportunity to make it and need to make sure that the US Embassy will accept my request. So again, depending on your country, if you actually look up on the US Embassy or Consulate website, they should have a section that's titled emergency requests, and they should have a process listed in there. So kind of similar to one of the examples earlier in the presentation, the US Embassy in India has indicated that they do not want students requesting emergency appointments outside of 60 days before the start date of your program. And that seems to be similar to most other US embassies and consulates. So check on the website directly, but our recommendation would be to request that emergency appointment within that 60-day window before the start date of your program. So again, I know that's only a 2-month turnaround time, but if you can request it during that window, you would have a better success rate, hopefully, of getting an emergency request than if you ask for it be outside of that time frame. Okay. And JC, I'll have you answer this one. I have my I-20 through the mail for this fall, but what should I do with it? Should I print my I-20 and go for the interview?
Yeah, so Beth covered pretty much all the steps that you need to take in order to set up that visa appointment. So yes, you want to print out your I-20, you want to pay your SEVIS I-901 fee, you want to secure your visa appointment and go from there. And there'll be a recording of this webinar so that you can review it and get ready for your interview.
All right. This is a personal experience from an anonymous attendee. My friends applied for the visa interview, but he got rejected by the visa officer. The visa officer was very investigating in a very rude way, which is wrong, and I'm scared to apply for the visa. I understand the concern, of course. I know there's a lot of stories out there about consular officers and how appointments can go in a way that's maybe not so positive, or they can be kind of rude. So again, I think the best thing that you can do is go in confidently, have everything organized and be ready with your answers. And try not to be thrown off by the demeanor of the consular officer. To try to put things in perspective, a lot of the consular officers are being told to conduct 20 to 30 interviews per hour with different students. So they're under a lot of time pressure and time constraints on their part to try to get through the student visa appointments for regular processing. So with that pressure, you can understand a lot of the consular officers are probably very direct and just want answers as quickly as possible because they're trying to get through their caseload as quickly as possible to accommodate everybody for that day. So unfortunately, there are cases where the consular officers, they have bad days too. And it's very possible that during those bad days, they come across rude. And that's really unfortunate. But I would just say go in, expect that the questions that we have shared with you are going to be asked, and just provide the answers to whatever the consular officer asks you. I know those aren't scientific tips, but of course, those are just hopefully putting some things in context. But Ahmed or JC, if you have anything to add to that, feel free. But
Ahmed had a really great point earlier. Be confident, right? Like just go in there and believe in yourself and convince them like why you want to come to the US and to Mankato and get the degree you're pursuing.
All right, I can take this next one because it's more related to admissions. And for the most part, since we do have quite a few questions, I'm going to skip through a couple of these and try to get the ones that are visa related, since this is the visa session. But just very quickly, for the question from anonymous attendee who did their GCSE Cambridge English ordinary levels and got a grade of B, for the English proficiency, do you still need to sit for your IELTS? As of right now, the answer is yes. So we do not accept O-level English for admission. So you do still need to go for your IELTS test. Okay, next question is from Amir. Thank you, Amir. I requested an emergency appointment to the US Embassy and they denied my emergency request and made the appointment for August 23rd. And currently the embassy is only receiving emergency appointments. And the rule is that if once you request an emergency appointment, you can't ask again. So if I can't attend my interview on the 23rd, the recent appointment is the next appointment would be January of 2022. So kind of going back to what JC said earlier, for the appointments, if you are not able to get an earlier appointment to arrive in time before the start date of classes, you would have to either start online or defer your admission completely to the spring semester for January of 2022. So at this point in time, those would be the two options. That August 23rd date, that's the first day of the fall semester classes. JC, do you know if we have a cutoff date as of right now of when it would be too late for a student to join us for fall?
Yeah, so that Friday, August 20th, would be the latest you could arrive. That's classes will fill up, and if you're not here before the start of the semester, it will be really difficult to get plugged in and ready to go. So we want you to be successful. So arriving before orientation week would be ideal, but if you could get there between the 16th and the 20th, That would be the latest.
Okay. Next question is from Raquel. I already deferred my application for the spring. Can I write an email and first try an emergency visa interview? So I'm assuming you deferred from the fall semester to the spring semester. In that case, I think if you still have an I-20 for the fall that's still active and you have not yet received your spring I-20, you could try to schedule an emergency visa interview. But if we've already deferred your I-20 to the spring semester, the dates on your I-20 would not merit an emergency appointment since it would be far outside of the 60-day window for the start date for the spring semester. So I think in that case, if you've already gone through that deferral process and received your spring 2022 I-20, I would just stick with that and try to get an interview date. But JC, do you have any additional recommendation for that?
No, I think you just want to double check where we're at with deferring that I-20. You don't want to apply for a visa appointment with an I-20 with the incorrect dates. So double check and see what is the I-20 that is currently in SEVIS.
Sounds good. All right, Waleed is asking, I've just been admitted to MNSU. Congratulations, Waleed. And will be filling up the I-20 request form as soon as possible. However, I'm currently renewing my passport and will be receiving it in around 2 months. I'm in possession of my old passport and the information that will be in the renewed passport is the same. In that case, the information will be the same. Should I fill out the I-20 request form now or should I wait until I receive my renewed passport? Good question. I can answer that unless JC feels passionate about answering that one. So you can actually go ahead and still fill out the I-20 request form right now with your passport information, because the information that we actually put into the I-20 is your name, date of birth, country of birth, and country of citizenship. So we don't enter in the passport number on your passport. So your passport number, of course, is going to change in the new passport, but you can go ahead and still submit that I-20 request form. But keep in mind, you'll want to try to expedite your new passport as soon as possible because you do need the new one to schedule your visa interview. They're going to want that newest version of your passport. But for now, yes, go ahead and request that I-20. We can still issue it with your current passport. Okay, Mustafa says your interview date is August 16th. And this is before the start date of classes on August 23rd. And like JC mentioned, Friday, August 20th is that cutoff date that we want students to arrive to Mankato by. So with an August 16th appointment, typically it's a 2-day processing to get your visa and your passport back after your interview, 2 to 3 days. So it is going to be a bit of a tight turnaround for you, but you should be able to hopefully get your passport and visa back, schedule your, book your flights, and then arrive in Mankato if that is, feasible for your situation. If for some reason something would change and you feel like that's too soon for you to come to Mankato, you do have that option to defer your admission or start your courses online from home. Okay, so Modu is asking, my appointment is in October and my program start date is the 16th of August. I don't know if the school can adjust my I-20 to the next available semester. JC, would you like to answer this one?
Yeah, for sure. So as Beth had mentioned earlier today, that you can request an emergency visa appointment up as soon as 60 days before your program start date. So you could try that and see if you could get an emergency visa appointment moved up sooner so that you can get here in time for the start of the semester. If not, you can begin your program part-time online from home and prepare for that visa appointment in October. You'll have to request an updated I-20 that shows you'll start in January, and sit for your visa appointment, and hopefully are successful and can get here then in January.
Violet has a great question. Is there any way as a university we can write directly to the embassy to request for us? The only documentation that we can provide essentially is that supporting letter for students to request their emergency appointment. So if you need that, we will write a letter on behalf of the student. As a university, unfortunately, we do not have any sway or control over embassy decisions to open up emergency appointments or things like this for specific student cases. So even if we are to email the consular section and ask for this information, it doesn't necessarily change anything. Ultimately, this is directives through the US Department of State, through the US government. So we don't have any control over those decisions. But again, if it's advocating on behalf of a student, we can provide the documentation that you need for the individual and support you from that aspect. But JC, do you have anything to add to that as far as contacting the embassies directly?
No, I wish that we could have a little bit of pull or sway with them, but they won't take an email or a letter from us. It's the arrangement is between you and the Department of State. You're the one applying for the visa. So the best we can do is trying to help you get that emergency visa appointment.
Okay, another question from Mustafa. On my I-20, my sponsor's name is my brother and he's staying in Europe. So I decided to use my dad's bank statement. Hopefully it's okay. So in that case, the I-20 sponsor should match the financial sponsor on your bank statement. So in your case, if your sponsor is your brother, but you're using your father's bank statement, I would recommend using your brother's bank statement or having your I-20 updated to reflect your father's information, because we wouldn't want you to go for your visa interview and then be rejected because the financial information doesn't match what's on your I-20. So that would be our recommendation. Make sure that the same sponsor on your I-20 is the same as the bank statement you're using for the visa appointment. So let us know if you need to make a change to your I-20. Otherwise, I would use your brother's bank statement so that it matches what's currently on your I-20.
I can answer this next one about entering the U.S. So effective January 26th, any passenger who's trying to enter the U.S. has to present a negative COVID-19 test that was taken within 3 days of departure, or proof of recovery from the virus within the last 90 days. So this is going to be required of you before you can get onto your plane to enter, to travel to the U.S. I don't know anything specific about the European Union. That is just in general for anyone trying to get into the U.S. So I suggest that you look at our travel.state.gov website and also our CDC website. Those are updated, as the pandemic has changed. So what I say today might be different than what is the case in 3 weeks. So you're going to have to just, keep doing your research and make sure that you are ready to board that plane when it's time. Oh, it looks like Beth is responding to one of them. Amir says he has a second question. If I'm not able to attend in January because the spots in January are starting from January 20th to January 30th, again, it depends. You can also try and get that visa appointment as soon as you get closer to 60 days to the program start date of January. See if you can get an emergency appointment. We've had students in the past defer their I-20, 2 semesters because they are just not comfortable traveling yet. And so they'll just take 2 semesters of part-time online from home And then as they feel more comfortable, they'll get an I-20 for that next intake or that next semester, and then they'll join us. So unfortunately, we don't have a concrete answer for you, as things will continue to change. So just keep an eye on the dates, and as you get closer to January start date, see if you can make it an emergency visa appointment.
All right, another question about the sponsor on your I-20. The sponsor's name mentioned is only my mom, but I would also like to take an educational loan. Will there be any issues in the visa process? So if your mother is one of the financial sources of sponsorship, you can of course keep that on your I-20. And then an educational loan, since there's not multiple spaces for us to put in multiple sources of funding under the other sponsorship, we wouldn't have enough room to put both family sponsorship and an educational loan. But that doesn't mean that you can't provide the educational loan as additional documentation. So since your I-20 currently states your mother, make sure that you do have a bank statement that matches what's on your I-20 from your mother, but you can also provide additional documentation from your educational loan as well. So that should not be an issue for the visa. Okay, it looks like JC is answering that next question. So another question from Walela. My friend didn't get an acceptance letter via his email, but can see it on his application status checker, so that he couldn't request his I-20 since he didn't know the acceptance date. Walela, if you can have your friends contact us, I'm going to put in, oops, I meant to type that. I'm going to type in to the chat box here our international email. So if you just want to send that to international@mnsu.edu, have your friends send it to us with their name and tech ID, or if you have that information, you can share it and we can look up your friend's information and contact them directly, at least to check their status. Okay, so another question about appointments from Oso. The visa appointment is on August 9th. Since the program start is August 16th, should I try to book an emergency appointment? In your case, I think having an August 9th appointment is really good because this is before the start date of the program. So our orientation starts August 16th. So this is, again, a very tight turnaround, but you should be able to arrive on campus the week of August 16th and at least get to Mankato before August 20th, which is that cutoff date. So that should be enough time for you to arrive here. However, if it comes within that 60-day window and you want to try to request an earlier appointment, an emergency appointment, you can do so. You shouldn't lose your current appointment, but there's a chance that they might not approve you for an emergency appointment since you do still have that August 9th date scheduled, which is still before the start date of your program. So I would say in your case, it's up to you. If you want to try to book an emergency appointment once you get into that 60-day window before August 16th. But otherwise, I would keep your August 9th appointment because that still is enough turnaround time to get to Mankato. Good question from an anonymous attendee. Why is it important to pay the SEVIS fee before my appointment? I have already scheduled my appointment for January 10th. Before paying the SEVIS fee, what should I do? JC, do you have any insight on that?
Right. So you have to pay your SEVIS fee before you sit for your appointment. We just tell students, just pay it. It's part of the process. But if you're unable to do it, you can still make your visa appointment, but you can't sit for the appointment without having paid it.
Okay, another question about passport issues with Michael. I have an exact problem with the old passport. I've applied for my I-20 over 2 months now, and I still got the same message. It says I can't get my I-20 until I submit my new passport. Can this be reviewed? Michael, if you want to share just privately in the chat to me what your tech ID is, I can look up your information and see maybe what the holdup is in some of the case notes. So again, if you want to send your tech ID in the chat privately, I can look up your information.
I can answer Edison's question. So Edison, if you have admission already to the university, you can definitely have your visa appointment interview date whenever, right? The SAT is not required for admission. So if you've already been admitted, you can move forward with making that visa appointment. If you're using SAT for maybe your English proficiency, or I'm not sure what the case may be, and you haven't been admitted, then you can't make your interview because you haven't been admitted and you don't have an I-20.
Oh, this is a good question. It's honestly related to visas, but I think we have time to answer it. So this is for online classes. What's the time difference when it comes to online studies? Is there a way that the school can carry out online classes for students with 8 hours or more time difference? So this is a good question. The way that online classes will be offered will be in one of two different formats. We call them synchronous and asynchronous. And when you're registering for classes, you'll know which type of course is offered. But essentially, synchronous means that there's a specific time that the class meets that you have to be there in person. So even if it's an online class, they physically want you to come to that Zoom session or the online meeting, just like what we're doing right now. And so for those types of courses, unfortunately, they're usually scheduled more so to accommodate most US-based students who are taking online classes. So in most cases, they're going to be taking place between 8 a.m. to at the latest 6 p.m. US Central Time. So understanding the 8-hour time difference, it's possible that you would have some early morning classes that you'd have to get up early for, or maybe some late evening courses that you would have to stay up for if it's that face-to-face meeting time. The other type of class would be asynchronous, which is a pre-recorded lecture of the class that you can watch anytime. So you do not have to specifically show up at a specific time to attend that course. So when you're registering for classes, you can pay attention to how that course is delivered, if it's synchronous or asynchronous, and then kind of look at the times of the class that they're offered and see what would be most convenient for your classes. But that is the challenge for students taking online classes from home, is that time difference. So again, pay attention to those times, make sure that the times that the class is offered is something that you can manage if you decide to take classes fully online from home. So does the 60-day rule apply for all countries? So again, that 60-day rule to schedule the emergency visa appointment does not necessarily apply to all of the embassies and consulates in each country. So do check the specific emergency appointment wait time rules or recommendations that are on the website for each country. Again, this was a guidance from the US Embassy in India, and a lot of other countries are following similar procedures. But again, it could be a little bit different as far as that timeline for the country that you're applying from. So I would recommend checking that website directly for any updates about that 60-day rule if they have a different timeline process. So Victor had a question, are we able to get the program for the course and possibly our lectures? So you can right now, if you are an admitted student, you can actually go into eServices and view the course schedules for the upcoming fall semester to see what's available. So if you just go to MNSU, I think it should just be eServices or search eServices. I'll type this into the chat. This is going to be where you can actually look up all the courses that are offered. Again, you do have to be an admitted student to see what's available, but you can log into eServices, check the schedule. You won't be able to register for classes, but you can at least see the types of classes for the fall semester. All right, it looks like JC is answering that question. So another question, I'm waiting for my I-20 and I've already filled up the I-20 request form. So can I book my visa interview? Typically, you're going to need to have some information from your I-20 in order to book the visa interview. They're going to need the SEVIS ID number from your I-20 and the program start dates. So you should wait until you actually get your I-20 to book that interview, because you won't have that specific information until you receive your I-20. And then finally, a question, how can I show my class schedule? So when you go for your visa appointment, you don't need to show your class schedule for that current semester. The consular officers don't expect this because they know you're not yet registered for classes. But they do want to see the program information that's on your I-20. That includes your program start date, the major that or program you're planning to study. So all that information will be on the I-20 and in your supporting documents. So you don't need to show that as part of your visa appointment. Okay, and what will be a problem if my TOEFL score expires at the time of the visa appointment? Good question. So if you've already been accepted to the university based on your TOEFL score and it was not expired at the time of acceptance, that should be okay. However, when you go to your visa appointment and if it's just expired just before the time of your appointment, just note that you were accepted during the time period that your visa scores were still valid. So your acceptance to the university is still good, but the consular officer could potentially ask why you have an expired TOEFL score. And I would just explain to them that you're still accepted to the university. This shouldn't be an issue if it's recently expired. If it's something that you're using and it's been expired, for a year or more, then that would be an issue, but we shouldn't have admitted you with an old score like that in the first place. So I don't see this being a significant issue since you've already been accepted based on valid TOEFL scores. All right, I think we got through all of the questions for right now. So this is perfect, right on time. So if there is anything, JC, Ahmed, that you want to add as final information, feel free to do so.
I don't think so. I just think it would be really helpful for you to keep checking your email and our social media platforms, because we will continue to do webinars like this one. And, things are changing with COVID, and so we want to keep you informed. So keep checking back with us, and don't be afraid to ask us questions. We've got great student staff who are eager to meet with you, and take advantage of that visa prep appointment that we have. We have very experienced students who can give you a practice session and talk you through it.
And then final question, where can I find webinars like this? We'll be sending them out to you by email, and we also post them on our YouTube channel. So if you search on YouTube, we're just at Kearney Center at MNSU. So you can actually find us there. If you look at this little icon on our PowerPoint in YouTube, just search Kearney Center. Our YouTube channel will come up, and we'll be posting all of the recordings and previous webinars on there as well, and also to your email. So with that, I just want to thank Ahmed and JC for helping with this session. It's been a really good session, and you all have asked great questions. So hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared going into the fall semester or spring semester and scheduling your visa appointments. But of course, if you do have additional questions, reach out and let us know. So with that, I think we will end our session for today. And I wish everybody a safe and healthy weekend.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Take care.
Thanks,
Take care,
everyone.